r/AskReddit. Serious, what is the downright scariest thing that has ever happened to you, be it paranormal or otherwise? I fell asleep on the couch at around 6 to 7 PM and woke up at 4 AM in the middle of my backyard when it was raining. Just copy plus pasting one of my old comments. I saw something weird fucking creepy. So have you ever seen what you thought looked like a person out of the corner of your eye? But they disappear before you get a good look at it? Well, while I was on Netflix and browsing Reddit when I saw a head peeking out from the stairwell. When I looked at it, it was still there. It slowly moved its head back behind the wall. I got a good enough look at it that it seemed to be charred burned. The thing that creeps me out the most is that my puppy who was with me at the time looked at that spot for the next 5 minutes with his hair and ears perked up. I was followed by a man in a car one night and I'm 100% certain he would have tried to abduct me. This was in Chicago after I helped chaperone a debate team trip. I was walking back to my car and the guy passed me, then circled back and passed again. I honestly thought he thought I was a hooker and remember thinking he'd be disappointed if he stopped. But then he started driving next to me at walking speed but had to move when another car came. I crossed and crouched behind a parked car for a minute and when I stood up he was gone. Kept walking and when I got to the next intersection he was hiding on a cross street. I was almost back to my car and he was still following me when I ran into a group of teenage-ish girls. I blurted out, "I think that man is following me." Meanwhile dude parks behind my car waiting for me to be alone again. Thankfully the girls walked me to my car and texted me his license plate, but I don't think I've ever felt so unsafe in my life. I was on a Girl Scout trip staying in this older house in Sandy Hook. I think I was around 11 or 12. We were all in bed. And for some reason I wanted to go downstairs. I remember hearing the parents talking in the downstairs kitchen. And I was walking toward where I saw a lit up room. Then it all disappears. And I'm standing in the middle of an empty dilapidated room. Random crap. Plaster on the floor. No furniture. I freak out and try to retrace my steps back to where I thought the adults were. I wander around for a bit and finally find a staircase. Weird, the staircase was blocked by a couch at the bottom. Then I realize I had been sleepwalking. And somehow managed to go up to the 3rd floor where we were told not to go. It was about 10:30 PM and I'm laying on the couch jamming out through my earbuds and playing on my iPad. I close my eyes while listening to Lithium by Nirvana. When I notice the song just cut out. I open my eyes and I'm outside. In the cul-de-sac at the other end of my neighborhood, about half a mile, wearing nothing but pajama bottoms and just below freezing temperatures, just staring out into a cornfield. I walk back to my house. And when I get to my room I saw it was like 3 AM. Still no clue what happened. But I had apparently scribbled in my school notebooks and put out the fireplace during my little nighttime adventure. I had thought it was all a dream until I woke up the next day and my mom asked about all the grass I had shaken off my pants onto the floor. So that freaked me out pretty bad. I was out snorkeling with some friends off the eastern coast of Nicaragua. I noticed a shark on the ocean floor just going about his business, so I pop out of the water to yell at my friends that there is a shark just below us. Suddenly I see the shark coming up towards me. Which at first I thought was awesome. But as it got closer, I could see it was coming directly at me. Which was not awesome. I proceeded to freak out. Swimming as fast as I can at the surface of the water. Lose a fin and my goggles while I rush to safety. At this point the shark is just a few feet from me as I hurl myself onto the boat only to see the Nicaraguans and my friends laughing hysterically. The shark was apparently caught on one of their lines and the local guy was just slowly dragging him up to the surface to get a better view. I am not normally scared of anything. This was by far the scariest moment of my life. Happening right now. Actually, I live in Northern California. I wasn't terribly far away from the Rocky and Jerusalem fires while they were still burning. Now there's a brand new fire. Arguably worse. And much closer to where I live. During the day it's smoky everywhere and at night it looks like Mordor is just over the mountain. I'm terrified my family is going to lose our home that I've lived in all my life. I'm scared that my friends are going to lose their homes. I'm just really scared. looking out my window and seeing a SWAT sniper perched on my porch aiming at the drunk belligerent asshole across the street. It was like 2 AM and there was a lot of noise going on outside. So I decide to look out the window and pull the curtains back, and there was 2 SWAT guys on my porch 2 feet from the window. They yelled, "Back away from the window now." Hours later, as the sun rose up, I was leaving to go to a dentist appointment and there was still a lot of cop cars on my street, and 2 SWAT guys walk out of the dude's house with boxes of guns. I nearly shit myself. When I was about 6-7 years old, I went shopping with my mom one time. I got bored with standing outside the grocery store and put my index finger in the padlock holes of the shop's closed door. Heavy Soviet era metal doors. Before I realized my mistake, some guy opened the door and the top of my finger got stripped clean to the bone. Thankfully I didn't put it all the way in. I remember looking at the mangled nail, protruding bone, screaming a lot, passing out, waking up in the hospital, my mom crying her eyes out, and then passing out again. Thankfully the doctor was a pro, and all I got from this incident is a small scar. I've had more painful experiences in my life, but this one topples them all. Mainly because most of what I can remember from this incident is goddamn terror and my mom crying hysterically. After our son was born, we had many incidents of his toys going off and making noise when everyone was downstairs. One time we had one go off in the middle of the night in our master bedroom. The logical explanation is that the electronics are unpredictable when the battery is dying or if a switch is halfway set. Still very upsetting at the time. Me arguing hysterically with my husband in a camper, with a tornado bearing down on us. Trying to tell him his truck was not the safest place for us to be, and neither was this camper, but there was no place else to go. Having already been in one tornado with less than desirable results, needless to say I was nearly pissing myself with fear. I was about 5 or 6 years old living in Dallas, and I was in the nurse's office when the tornado warning siren went off. The nurse ran out of the room towards the other side of the school, leaving me behind. The lights had gone off and I didn't want to be alone, so I went to follow her and ended up on this ramp that connected both sides of the school. To the right of me was the cafeteria and on my left was a wall with floor-to-ceiling windows. It was so dark outside that I could barely see anything out the window. The sound of the siren combined with the intense wind scared me the most. By this point I was in tears and I just stood there for who knows how long because I was so scared. Then the vice principal came running up the ramp, scooped me in her arms and asked whose class I was in. I remember walking into the classroom and seeing my teacher with a flashlight in her hands huddled with the other students in the middle of the classroom. 16 years later, May is still my hero. Sleep paralysis. Just being unable to move while in bed and see a figure with blood red eyes looking at you. I was working in the Amazon doing sustainable resource surveys and often traveled with local rangers. When traveling with the rangers we would also look for poachers. We caught some one day and they attacked and butchered one of the rangers with a machete before the other ranger pulled a gun and subdued the men. It was horrible. My mom was a drug addict. She was passed out on the couch most of my life. One night I was at home with my 2 sisters, all of us under 12. Mom was passed out as always. Men in black jackets with police labeled on the back started banging on our doors, banging on the windows, shouting that they were the police and to open up. Being that we were all little kids, we were terrified and had no idea what to do. My eldest sister made sure everything was locked up and ushered us into a back room as she called our grandparents. Thankfully they were a short drive across town, so they showed up rather quickly. One by one, every single guy walked past them and got into an unmarked white van. They didn't make eye contact. They didn't say a word. They just left. One of the scariest, weirdest experiences I've had. There's no telling what would have happened to us if we had opened the door. Makes my skin crawl thinking about it even 20 years later. When I was driving through my burning town, I had to turn back from the road I was supposed to take to evacuate because a burning branch fell and blocked me in. I turned and drove through the entire town. There was ash falling and flames on both sides, with houses and residences burning around me. I drove by melted cars, downed power lines and pieces of cars from car accidents. It looked like someone dropped a bomb and everything was destroyed. My only thought was to get home to my family to make sure they are okay. My phone had no service, adding to the feeling of not knowing. As I drove, fire personnel and police were going in the direction I came from. I didn't believe I would make it to the other end and that my fate would be like the cars I drove past. I have a video of part of my reaction to what I saw. I edited out parts of the silence. I didn't realize that after taking a few pictures I threw my phone down and it started recording. The video ends right as I react to witnessing an entire neighborhood engulfed in flames. It was chilling to watch. So I didn't watch it again, only edited it and uploaded it. So I hope you can feel what I felt. Got robbed at gunpoint at work. Pretty minor compared to other stories here. But it was one of the few times in my life where I legitimately thought I was going to die. A bit late to the game. But it's about 2:30 AM. I was out drinking one night and decided I was too drunk to drive. So I called a cab. I wait and try to avoid the very drunk guy smoking outside. Cab pulls up and I hop in. He asked me where to and I tell him. We start chatting. And he's got this adorable hound dog in the front seat. As we're talking he starts telling me about his startup cab company. I tell him it's neat that another company is helping them get on their feet by passing them calls. He looks in the rearview mirror and says, "We don't have a phone number." I ask how he found me then. He says, "We also don't have a base. And you are the one that flagged me down." I quickly register that not only did I get in the car with a complete stranger, but no one knows where I am, and the last person to see me was a next near blackout guy on the sidewalk. Luckily the cabbie drops me at home and I praise all the powers that be that nothing bad happened to my dumbus. I thought I was watching my grandmother die. My maternal grandmother's funeral had just concluded and we were gathered at a place nearby eating some cake and celebrating her life. One of her oldest friends was holding a speech about when they first met and how great she was when I noticed something was off about my paternal grandmother. Her mouth was wide open and she couldn't speak properly. An ambulance was called. And it felt like it took forever for it to arrive. I was so scared I would lose my other grandmother so soon. But it turned out okay. It was her blood pressure that was off. And there had apparently been more similar cases that day. She is fine now. But I was terrified she was going to die. She was actually laughing about it a few minutes after she got back to normal. I had a severe allergic reaction to something the doctors gave me after knee surgery when I was 14. First my face would start swelling and be all pins and needles. Then it would spread to the rest of my body. My tongue and throat swelled up so it was hard to breathe. My ears must have swelled up because I could barely hear anything. And I couldn't see well because I blacked out but was still aware of what was going on. The entire allergy team at Children's was outside my room trying to decide what to do. I was having such a severe reaction. They didn't want to risk making it worse by moving me to the ICU. After about 15 minutes it faded away. Then an hour or two later it happened all over again. Still don't know exactly what I was allergic to. So visiting my grandparents who lived in an extremely poverty-ridden rural area, they had an outhouse still, and a semi-working Charlotte in the house. Chickens, etc. There are maybe 10-15 people who live around for miles. At night it's dead silent and black. Not dark. Black. So black you can almost touch it and it seemed to vibrate. But I am fine cause I am with my pawpaw in his bed with me there. Right? So, one night the screaming begins. It is this lady's voice just screaming like she is dying. Over and over again for a few minutes. I think I was dreaming briefly and snuggle up to my grandfather. Who says shh? That shh made me want to run out of the black room and scream. Then it started again. At this point Pawpaw hops out of bed. Gets a shotgun. Walks out of the room. Opens the front door in his slow grandpa walk. Ballum. Ballum ballum ballum. Came back into the house. Trudged back to the bed. Rubbed me on the head, said it was a cougar. Put up the gun and said go to sleep. He was snoring in about 5 seconds I think. Not any. No sir, I didn't sleep anymore. Years ago. I was in bed and was woken up by the loud sound of an airplane. I thought it was obnoxious. But not unusual, so I waited for it to stop. But it didn't stop. It just got louder and louder until it was deafening. It was so loud that in that moment, I honestly thought a plane was going to come crashing through the roof and I was going to die in my bed. Like, I got the full effect of the drawn out seconds of blinding terror and then a sudden wave of calm, which is I guess the brain's preparation for the end. I heard my younger brother wake up in the room next to mine and start screaming and crying, and then heard my mom wake up and run to get him. No plane crash, though. And the noise just went away. I know I didn't dream it because we all remember the same thing. I don't know anything about planes, but I live in the street Louis area and there is a military base nearby. I've wondered if it was a military jet or something. But if that's the case, I don't know why they would be allowed to fly so low over a residential area at night. Seems like that would be against regulation. Does anyone have an idea? One time I woke up and my eyes were super dry. Like, beyond description. I opened them and it was pitch black. Couldn't see a thing. But I knew there was light in the room since my alarm went off, so it must have been 8 AM at least. I literally felt my eyelids to make sure they weren't closed. I shut them and cried for like a minute to moisturize them and I could see again. So yeah. Waking up blind is not a fun thing to have happen. I idiotically jumped off a cliff next to an engorged waterfall that was like 40 feet up into a nearly flooding river. I had never jumped from that high before. I was underwater for several lifetimes in what felt like an unlit cave with tornado force winds and you can't breathe the air. I wasn't really positive I was swimming up, but luckily I was, and I got my head above water only to realize you can't tread water in a rushing river like you can in a lake. Basically I was drowning without understanding why. Finally my friend's advice went through my head and I got my shit together and swam to the side where a jetty current from the waterfall began pulling me towards, which is like an underwater Ferris wheel that doesn't stop until the river slows down. I was able to grab onto a rock and climb onto and then up the cliff face. I still can't be comfortable near rushing water in the dark. I saw the guy shoot himself once. Fucked me up pretty bad. But it's much better now. Losing control of my vehicle at 70 miles per hour. Luckily the median was a nice flat prairie, so I just slid to a stop. I remember that feeling though when I overcorrected. It was dark and I couldn't see that far in front of me and just had an overwhelming thought of whelp. This is it. Gross story. My appendix ruptured inside of me when I was 9. My mom told me it was a stomach virus when I was screaming, crying and couldn't walk. She took me to the ER a week later when the pain went down a bit. They gave me a CAT scan and said there was a huge mass there, but they didn't know what it was. They opened me up to see and removed bits of my appendix which were covered in tons of white pus. Thank you strong immune system. I should be dead. I was traveling down a back road coming back from a soccer game. I was 10, and we looked up through the sunroof and saw what looked like a giant black plane flying low. It was so close it was only just over the treetops. But you couldn't really hear it even when we turned the radio down. After what seemed like an hour, which was most likely only seconds, it disappeared. We weren't even close to a landing strip, so it couldn't have been that. I still have no idea what it was. Another would be that all of my relatives when sleeping over at what was my great grandparents' house had the same dream of a witch-like woman beckoning them to come here. I had the dream and freaked out, then was told after that my aunts, uncles and even mom had it. When I was younger, I was in a neighborhood super soaker fight. The people down the street from me had a bunch of family from the south that flew in. And it was sort of a family reunion for them. Some guy was spraying kids in the face hard with the hose. So I snuck up on him and got him pretty good in the face. Seemed legit at the time. He chased me into my friend's garage and pinned my head down into this row of cardboard boxes next to a pop-up camper. He grabbed a crowbar and went to hit me in the head. Missed. Dented the camper. And my other neighbor across the street looked over and screamed. The guy went home and we called the cops. But didn't end up pressing charges. I do not know why. WTF. Snorkeling in Mexico when I was 8. See a flash. Turn. And realize there's a barracuda about 5 feet away from me. I get the fuck out of there and tell my dad, who tells the lifeguards who make everyone get out of the water for a little while. I was watching The Exorcist when I was 16 and my grandmother came home and told me to turn it off because that was the last movie my grandfather watched the night he died. About 20 minutes later I saw him rocking in the chair next to my couch, and no matter how many damn times I pulled the blanket over my head he stayed there until he looked at me, smiled and vanished. Still can't watch that movie to this day without freaking out about it, and that was 18 years ago. Edit. Spelling. So one time one of the horses at work got herself stuck in a fence. I was trying to calm her down and was calling for help from the other staff. I was on the other side of the fence, inside one of the pens where 2 more horses lived. The stuck horse was in one of the turnout fields. So one of the other horses in the field decides to be a bitch and kick at her. The mare pitches forward, knocking the panel over and into me. So I fall down and hit my head pretty hard. I just remember being terrified that she was gonna land on me when she was jumping over me. Almost stepped on me too. Took me a good 45 minutes to calm down. Paranormal. Hearing my name called by my mother outside in our country home. My mother was in town 30 miles away. Otherwise, slid on an icy road on the way to work and totaled my car on the cemetery gate. Flying from Denver to Nick. About 30 seconds after the plane leaves the ground the left engine explodes, likely a bird they said. I'm pretty calm, but start getting freaked out when I notice the stewardess are all crying. Completely freaked out when we are getting close to landing and there are fire trucks all up and down the runway. And the runway we are landing at is way the hell away from the terminal and everything else. Bro. So I don't wish this situation upon anyone. But if it ever does happen to anyone you must get on the next flight. Some of my fellow passengers opted to take a train home. If I'd done that I'm positive I would have never flown again. I live in China right now. A couple nights ago someone got into my apartment while I was sleeping and took my iPhone, which is just inches from where I sleep. I got caught in a riptide in Fiji with a couple of friends. I remember one of them yelling help Emmy and I had to yell back that I couldn't. None of us knew to swim parallel to shore. But we all made it out due to sheer determination. I had nightmares about waves for years after. When I was about 14 my sister and I shared a room, but when she moved out I got more and more uncomfortable. Anyways, in one of the corners of the room I had a net that held up my teddy bears towards the roof. I had a weird dream and woke up sweating and I heard someone laugh. I look up and saw white hollow eyes and a top hat and what looked like a person swinging their legs. They sat there mocking me saying how worthless I was, and eventually I got the courage to leave and go to my parents' room. He followed me to my parents' room laughing the whole time and my parents would not wake up even with me screaming, so I sat in the corner crying all night while he mocked me. It happened a couple more times but that the worst night. I eventually took down the net and got rid of all the teddy bears and haven't owned any since. I was supposed to pick up my 6-year-old grandson from school. He took off with a friend right after school let out. Nobody knew where he was. I was going out of my mind looking for him. I asked some random kids if they saw a first grader with a Minions backpack. They said they thought they saw him with a boy named Miguel. I went back inside the school and asked about a first grader named Miguel. They told me he lived 2 blocks from school. I found them playing catch in his front yard. I've never been so scared in my life. 2 experiences come to mind, so I will list the scariest and then the most paranormal. First was the summer between my freshman and sophomore year in high school. My parents and I were in Utah at Bryce Canyon and were going on a horseback ride through the canyon. While we were going along the trail, there was a portion that had a drop of about 150 feet to the left and a hill on the right. Well, my horse fell down. Luckily it was to the right. Had it fallen to the left, I really doubt I would have survived the fall with a horse falling on top of me. The most paranormal was when I was 7. About a year after my grandfather passed away, I was having a dream that my grandfather was carrying me. I can't for the life of me remember where he was carrying me. But for some reason I woke up, and I would swear I was being carried. Like a little kid. I looked down and couldn't see anything below me, nor behind me. I then promptly fell back asleep. I woke up in my parents' bed. I have no clue how I got there. Was deployed to Afghanistan and on our way to Chow on Thanksgiving Day. All of a sudden we hear the alarm go off and get caught off guard since it was only 1 PM. The alarm also indicates you are within the projected area of impact. We all immediately drop to the ground and hear the cram start up. As it is shooting, the sound is getting closer and closer, meaning that the rocket is flying right over us. We all look up and see a trail of grey faint smoke, and we all thought we were going to get hit by shrapnel if the cram hit the rocket. Luckily enough it got hit but was a dud and deflected and spun onto the flight line, which we found out at a later time. However, after the initial alarm cut off and the cram stopped, the gate guard screamed for us to take cover. We jump up and run to the nearest bunker. Then sat and waited, hearing the Apaches circle the mountains. Crazy shit. Waking up to realize I'm naked and there are tons of people hovering over me. Then I lost and regained consciousness repeatedly. I would wake up, open my eyes, start struggling, and then pass out again. Eventually I realized I had to stay still, or they would keep putting me under. I couldn't remember my own name or anything about myself, and very briefly wondered if I had been abducted, but decided I didn't believe in aliens. It was so disturbing to be able to have chains of thought like that but still not have any clue who I was. Somebody asked me if I knew my name or what country I was in. I was abroad at the time, and I couldn't answer. Eventually I figured out I was in the hospital being treated for a seizure, and after that relaxed quite a bit and started to remember some basic facts about myself, but before that point it was easily the most terrified I had ever been. My brother fell asleep while we were driving back from our first day of school. We were on the freeway, and I didn't know what was going on until the car started drifting into the dirt lining the road. I shouted at him to wake up, and he tried to correct the truck about 5 times before we swerved back into traffic and rammed straight into the side of a semi-truck. It was like I was living a normal life, and when we started swerving, I had entered some sort of convoluted dream. I literally thought to myself, this can't be happening. We weren't injured, and we actually found out later that we had hit the one part of the truck that wouldn't have killed us instantly, and b, needed repairs anyway. The officers on the scene also did not give my brother a misdemeanor for the accident when they heard that he was trying to get into West Point. He's now in his 2nd year there. It happened last night. I almost sank a 12-foot boat in open water on a lake with 4 other people in it. It was around 10 PM. I didn't realize the front was overloaded and proceeded to accelerate. The front dipped and we were immediately in a foot of water inside the boat. Some quick thinking and 2 bail buckets saved us from a very long swim. It wouldn't have been as bad if my uncle hadn't drowned in the same area snowmobiling some years ago. After we made it to our camp safely, I broke under the stress. Beer and some tequila helped though. I was house sitting for my parents a few years ago, and as a girl home alone is off to do at 1:30 in the morning, I began to watch The Exorcist. I felt comfortable, as I was surrounded by 7 dogs and had just finished some popcorn. During the psychiatrist scene where Captain Howdy speaks for the first time, all of the dogs suddenly jerked awake. They stared in the same direction, silent for a moment, then began to bark and howl in the most bone-chilling way. The hair on the back of my neck went up. It sounded like a herd of horses were running through the rest of the house, slowly approaching my room. And as the sound gets louder, the entire house began to shake. Linda Blair was roaring on the television screen while the world seemed to come down around me. I felt myself grow lightheaded and faint, convinced that the apocalypse had begun in my parents' backyard. Then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. And that is the story of the first and only earthquake I've ever experienced. I can laugh about it now, but that night, I thought hell itself was about to swallow me up. Fell 75 feet off a cliff when I was in my 20s. I was pretty sure I was going to die, but I got lucky. Probably when a dude broke into me and my girlfriend's house. We keep a baseball bat next to our bed. The dude had a knife, and the moment I saw that I just went apeshit on him. I think the scariest moment is when I disarmed the knife, knowing that he might swing at me even though he was dazed by the baseball bat wax. Slipping on black ice and hurtling towards an oncoming tree at 50 miles per hour knowing there was nothing I could do to stop it has to be pretty high up on my list. A couple years ago as I was laying down to sleep, I felt a pain in my chest and a valve on my heart stick shut. I live alone so there was no one to alert. Shortly after, my breathing stopped and darkness descended. I have always had tinnitus, and when my blood no longer flowed, the high-pitched whine came to an end. I figured at least I'd have a few moments of peace before the end. However, it seemed about a minute later when the valve released and my heart resumed beating. I was too weak to get up and call an ambulance, so instead decided to try to sleep. I recall thinking that if my heart stopped while I was asleep, it wouldn't be a bad way to go. However, morning came and I awoke feeling exhausted. I went to the hospital. Doctors didn't find anything wrong but had me wear a heart monitor for a month. TLDR. Heart stopped. Didn't die. When I was in the room when my dad was diagnosed with cancer, I took the trash out the other night. In the pitch black. Nothing happened. But I ran for my life the whole time. The OB said, "Well, there's two." Tripped up a stone step holding my baby daughter. Sounds simple, but the moment I realized I was falling and could either drop her to break my fall or land on her seemed to last forever. Fortunately, I found my footing enough to stumble and land on my side. But there was a split second where I thought, oh fuck, I'm going to kill my baby. She only cried for a few seconds. But it took me several minutes to get myself together before going inside. My 4-year-old son had a habit of announcing when he had to use the bathroom. He would say, "I gotta go potty." One time he makes his business known and heads off toward the bathroom. He returned seconds later and says there's already someone in the bathroom. Now I do know for a fact that it's just the two of us home, so the hair stands up on my neck. I ask him, "What do you mean?" He repeats, "There's already someone in the bathroom." Now I'm thinking, is it someone I see dead people or someone in a hockey goalie mask? So I grab the biggest knife from my knife block and tell him to stay here. I walk to the bathroom. Take a wide angle to see in. Nobody. Slowly and quietly walk toward the shower and pull back the curtain. Nothing. By now my son has walked around the corner and I ask him, "Where did you see the person?" He points to an unflushed toilet and says, "See, someone's already here." His big brother didn't flush the toilet. Probably a full-on existential crisis panic attack that had me lying on the floor paralyzed with fear. Never again. The worst kind of fear. Totally trapped. Terrified of life. Terrified of death. I was home alone and had some heavy news delivered to me via email and started having a panic attack that turned into muscle spasms and seizures. My stomach was convulsing, making vomit gag once a minute for about an hour. I thought I was going to die until my sister got home. Called my dad and the ambulance, where they fixed me up. When I was 16 I was at a local mall by myself. I noticed a large man kept going where I would go and just gave me a bad gut feeling. After about 15 minutes of him following me around I go into a Starbucks and sure enough he follows. This Starbucks was right next to the mall's public restroom. And I so stupidly decided to go into the women's room. Thinking he wouldn't follow, I go into a stall, lock the door, and pull my feet up so they can't be seen since the stall's lock didn't continue to the floor. No more than 10 seconds later I hear the bathroom door open and someone walking in. The man stopped in front of my stall door and just stands there, facing it for what felt like minutes. He was so close to the door his boots were pretending into the stall. Then, without any words spoken from either of us, he left and I never saw him again. Scariest few minutes of my life, and I'm still so mad at myself for isolating myself in a bathroom. When I checked into rehab and watched my husband walk out of the doors crying after helping me get my things, just knowing the jig was up and I had to get better or I'd have no one. I drank for more than half my life. So learning a new way of being was absolutely frightening. It ended up being the best decision I've ever made. However, opening my front door to see 12 armed police officers about to raid the house. I was asleep in bed one night and my mom, who had recently taken interest in home security, had put a wooden dowel in my bedroom window and forgot to tell me about it. It was obviously a redneck version of a window lock, because we lived in an old house and didn't have locks on the windows for some reason. In a I found out later that there was an electrical fire in the hallway outside my bedroom. And I woke up to smoke slipping into my bedroom from beneath my door. Being a little kid, I was scared shitless and had no idea what was going on at the time. And so being smart, I thought to try and get out my window. But I couldn't get the dowel out. I spent what felt like 10 minutes trying to get my little fingers around it and slip it out of the window sill but couldn't. Finally, my mom got into my bedroom, grabbed me and wrapped a wet towel around me, and supermommed us out of the house. And me safely out of trouble. Best part? She went back in, got our fire extinguisher from under the kitchen sink and put that fire out herself. Thankfully, it wasn't some huge, home-destroying catastrophe. When I was younger and visiting my parents, I took my Stumpy, never met a stranger lab mutt out to go potty around 5 AM. At the end of the super long driveway I ran into a guy just kind of hanging out in the pine trees. He asked for a cigarette and when I said I didn't have one he wished me a good night. The whole time my happy little dog, she must have been about 10 months old, was straining towards him for attention. I get halfway up the driveway and she suddenly lunges behind me, practically ripping my shoulder out of the socket. Just going absolutely apeshit. Something I have never and still haven't seen from her to this day 8 years later. When I spun around to get her under control I see the guy is just beyond her reach booking it away. He was following me up the driveway. Later I remember my family remarking over the few days I was there that it smelled like cigarettes around the front porch and garage. This guy had probably been hanging around our house. I don't know what would have happened had my dog not flipped her shit. If you want to get nothing in return, you can like and join my Discord. There is a link in the description.